Welcome to Quality Matters, where we speak with experts across industries to see how their perspectives can inform our pursuit of high-quality education for all students. I'm Shaka, and this is Caitlin, and we're happy to be your guides for this limited series.
Like you, Shaka and I are passionate about all students having access to a great education, and quality is a driving force behind our work. But what does quality really mean? In an era where parents can customize their child's education, this question is more important than ever.
During each session, we'll hear from leaders in education, technology, business, sports, and the arts. We hope to apply their insights to our pursuit of a great education in the K-12 space.
Join us on this journey to secure a great education for all children. This is Quality Matters. Awesome. Well, good morning. We're back today, and we're really happy to have Kerry joining us. Kerry leads the Education Entrepreneurship Lab at FEE and also is the host of Liberated Podcast. So we're looking forward to sort of switching the chairs on you and welcoming you as a guest on Quality Matters.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kerry. Yeah.
So to start us off, I'm curious what sort of got you inspired in this world of education freedom, market freedom, innovation.
Yeah, so I was an economics major as an undergrad and fell in love with economics. And through the lens of economics, became really interested in this question of why is there so much variety and abundance in other areas of our lives that we don't seem to have in education, which was sort of one size fits all, monopolistic. And that led me to become more and more interested in education and education policy. I went to graduate school here at the Ed School for education policy, became interested in the charter world. So this was sort of in the early 2000s. Charter schools were sort of just coming on the scene. I connected with the Pioneer Institute, the free market think tank here in Massachusetts that at the time was really a leader in helping to incubate charter schools, and they had a program called Building Excellent Schools, which started at Pioneer and then later spun off as its own nonprofit. But they were really trying to accelerate and incubate charter schools in Massachusetts, and so that was sort of my first kind of policy lens. And then I just began writing about education, alternative education, alternatives to schooling. Chose a different sort of education for my children, unschooling and self-directed education. And yeah, from there, just continue to do a lot of sort of spotlighting, storytelling around different types of education models, and then linking that to state policy.
Has there been any, or is there any particular model or instance that stands out as sort of a gold star or something that just has you excited for what it looked like then and what it might look like in the future?
I have never been more excited or optimistic about education than I am right now. There is such an opportunity for personalization, for choice, again, for this abundance and variety in education models that finally families are able to select the education that aligns with their preferences and needs in the way that they're able to do in all other consumer choices in their lives. So I think we're just at the beginning of this sort of decentralization and market-based moment in education, and I can't wait for the future.
Kerry, one of the things I'm really curious about, you mentioned that something that really spurred your interest in education was looking around at other sectors and wondering, hey, why don't we see that same type of innovation in the education sector? There are other sectors that have a lot of sort of reach or similar reach. Maybe healthcare comes to mind. We've spoken with somebody who's working in the housing space. Are there other sectors that you look at and you go, ooh, that is something that's more like an exemplar for what education could be and should be?
Yeah, definitely not healthcare. Healthcare is extremely regulated. We don't nearly have the choice and variety that we should. But I mean, I think that the perfect example I like to use is walking into the grocery store, and especially the grocery store breakfast aisle, right? So you're able to walk into the breakfast aisle, choose from a whole assortment of cereals, organic cereals, conventional cereals, brand names, generic names, breakfast bars, Pop-Tarts, organic oatmeal, inorganic oatmeal, granola, all kinds of things. Or you could go to a separate part of the grocery store and get bacon and eggs or yogurt. So I think that what's so great about that example is we have all of this variety and abundance in most of our consumer choices. And we just don't have that until now in education. And what's great again about the sort of the grocery store aisle is we're all choosing something that, again, is aligned with our distinct preferences and needs. Some of us might think that small batch granola is the highest quality breakfast food you can possibly eat, and we will try to persuade others that we're correct. But other people might say, no, I want bran flakes, or I want Lucky Charms, or I want something else. And that's okay. And that's why we don't have the conflict in the grocery store breakfast aisle around consumer choices the way we do, I think, in areas of life that are much more centrally controlled and regulated.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the choices that people make. And obviously, as we heard in the introduction, you're a parent also. And so this is where the rubber meets the road, right? I'm always very interested in what experts and sort of advocates do in their own homes and for their own families. And so you've had some interesting paths. Could you say a little bit more about, and you've written a book about it, about, unschooling and like, what is that? Maybe explain it to folks who aren't as familiar with that term.
Yeah, so I really gravitated to this model of self-directed education, began homeschooling my children. I live right here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and decided early on that we have so many resources, so many opportunities, and possibilities for learning experiences here in the city that even before my children reached school age, I thought, well, homeschooling will be the best way for us to kind of maximize all of these opportunities. That I really felt like if they went to a conventional school, their world would contract in a way that hadn't been true in our expansive homeschooling experience here in the city. And so through that choice of homeschooling and connecting with all kinds of programming and resources and microschools, then I became more and more attracted to this idea of self-directed education, of really seeing the ways in which a child's natural curiosity and drive to learn can lead to really powerful outcomes in learning, and saw that with my own kids. And that is sort of the premise of my Unschooled book that came out in 2019 that talks about the philosophy of self-directed education and then the variety of ways in which it's practiced. It could be a form of homeschooling. I think more frequently, and certainly my experience with my kids, is in some microschools and low-cost private schools. My children attend the Sudbury Valley School, about 45 minutes from here in Framingham, Massachusetts, that was founded in 1968 as a fully non-coercive, self-directed school. There's no classes, no grades, no homework, no tests. Children are fully in charge of their own learning and their own lives, and it's just wonderful to see. And Sudbury Valley inspired the growth of dozens of Sudbury model schools around the world. And then there's sort of other self-directed learning models that sprang, I think, in large part from Sudbury's model, as well as other programs that were doing similar things.
Listening to you talk about all of these experiences and different initiatives that you guys have experienced, it's hard to not think about innovation. And even if a school has been around since 1968 or whenever you just mentioned, it sounds like it's evolved to continue to meet the needs, just like your example of the grocery store, constantly meeting the needs of whatever the students are looking for, the parents are looking for, the community is looking for. Along this line of innovation, can you tell us about the Education Entrepreneurship Lab and sort of what you're doing there and who's involved and what it's looked like and how it's evolved?
Yeah, such a great question. So, I had been following the growth and diversification of the homeschooling movement throughout the first couple of decades of the new millennium and the emerging microschool movement. And so, again, my 2019 books have documented that. And then a year later, after the book was published, the world changes. Yeah. Everyone is starting to think a little bit more about homeschooling, or had that sort of default local school inertia disrupted. And I think it really created a moment of opportunity for parents to kind of look around and say, what else is out there? How else can I approach teaching and learning? Who's doing what? We saw the growth of pandemic pods in the summer of 2020, the sort of spontaneous grassroots efforts of parents getting together to provide, safe social experiences for their children, as well as make sure that they were continuing to learn the content that they wanted them to learn. And many of those pandemic pods have evolved into full-fledged microschools, in some cases either full-time programs for homeschoolers that are a fraction of the cost of traditional private schools, or recognized low-cost private schools that are, again, much more accessible to more families. So this movement was already happening pre-2020, as the school choice movement was. And of course, we saw both of those trends really skyrocket post-2020. And so I've been at the Foundation for Economic Education as a senior fellow since 2019, and had been documenting a lot of these trends before, during, and after COVID, the height of COVID. And so in early 2022, I decided to shift up just my articles, primarily at the time at Forbes and Fee.org, to more multimedia, similar to what you're doing here with Quality Matters, because I felt that it was a great opportunity for listeners and viewers to hear directly from the founders themselves, these entrepreneurial parents and teachers who are building these creative schooling options. And so here we are, I guess 2.5 years later, and today was my 243rd episode. It's a twice weekly podcast that just spotlights these innovators doing amazing things.
Yeah, and so is the idea that the lab will sort of serve as an incubator, or kind of to get the word out to as a connector, maybe to other education entrepreneurs, or to parents, or what are some of the functions?
Thanks, Shaka. I didn't answer the rest of that question, but about the Education Entrepreneurship Lab, we just felt that there was so much momentum and interest with the podcast and some of the work we were doing around education entrepreneurship that we wanted to basically scale, to create a bigger program that would have more reach and impact. And so the Education Entrepreneurship Lab at Fee includes Liberated, which is the podcast and the weekly e-newsletter, but it also includes some other really exciting programs. So we have a new Entrepreneur in Residence program. Our first Entrepreneur in Residence at Fee is Tobin Slavin, who's the co-founder of Acton Academy, Fort Lauderdale. So he's talking about his experience as a school founder. He's also a former educator and longtime entrepreneur, talking about his experience in the classroom, as well as what he sees in terms of education trends. And then we have a new Enterprising Founder Award that we'll be announcing soon. And that is, really focused on helping to identify founders who are embracing the sort of freedom philosophy of limited government, free markets, private property, individual freedom, and so being able to highlight some of their work. And then we have our first webinar coming up shortly that really is geared towards parents and founders looking to find or build education solutions in their own communities. Excited to see more of that. So more of these cohorts, more support, more materials. We have some free downloadable toolkits for both parents and entrepreneurs coming on deck. And then just a wonderful new partnership with the new Liberated Education Associate at Fee, Nasia Israel, who's a homeschool graduate herself, a young entrepreneur.
Yeah, I've met her. She's really great, really tremendous.
Yeah, and participating with us as part of the Coke Associate program. So just lots of great activity, and I think the lab is really giving us the foundation to achieve some of these goals.
So I have to ask, because I love hearing there's so much going on, and it's so exciting. I'm not surprised in the slightest that your sense and your enthusiasm for education moving forward is so high, because look at all of the neat things you're able to have exposure to. I don't think that we are the only ones that would be curious how you sort of assess or measure quality when it comes to these I don't know if unregulated is the right term, but there's so many things happening, and they're happening in different ways. How do you, across the board, sort of continue to keep a finger on the pulse as far as measuring quality and assessing successful outcomes from all of these different venues? and ventures.
I mean, I think, again, that the biggest measure of accountability in this world of decentralized market-based education is parent choice. So if parents are choosing something and continuing to choose that option, then that is quality in their minds. If they are not choosing that school or space, it will close, which is a good thing. That's sort of a sign of a healthy, dynamic free market in education that's responsive to consumer demand. I think quality is in the eyes of the beholder. It's, we have to think about this idea of subjective value, that it is an individual's idea of what quality means to them. For some families, quality will mean abundant time outside in a forest school with their kids stomping in mud and getting dirty and exploring nature. For other families, quality will be a much more sort of traditional, conventional form of education with a top-down established curriculum and frequent testing and everything in between, right? And so I think, again, what we have now is such a great moment of education choice and variety that enables families to figure out just what they need, and what quality means to them. And, I sort of love this question because I think we forget that, again, education is a sector. It's increasingly becoming market-based, which I think is a good thing. And when we think about quality questions in the rest of our lives, how are we measuring quality in any of our other decisions? I know I was told to put my Dunkin' Donuts coffee on the ground, but, I think this is a perfect example because I'm a Dunkin' Donuts fan, right? Like, this is my preferred coffee. Well, around the corner for me, just down the road here in Harvard Square, is a high-end boutique coffee shop, which my husband loves. And I've been told by the coffee elites that it is the best coffee around with the best brewing techniques, highest quality output. I don't like it. I will walk a couple blocks further to go to Dunkin' and get my my Dunkin'. And so I think that, again, that just sort of speaks to this idea that quality means different things to different people. And in a free market driven by entrepreneurship and choice, families are able to find just what they're looking for.
Yeah. I love that example, by the way. But I want to push on it. I want to press on it a little bit more. What do you say? Because I would say, or some people might say, I don't know, that that's a great example. But what we're talking about is higher stakes than coffee and donuts. Now, for some people in the morning, they would say there are no stakes higher than coffee and in the morning, right? First thing, but there's less at stake if my coffee comes from this shop or from that shop and etc. Sometimes, what you don't know is you send your kid to a school for a year and you don't even know until the end of the year, hey, turns out nobody ever taught my child how to read. That it feels like the stakes are just different. Does that change things, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Shaka. In a free society, we have the freedom to make bad choices. And, we're not regulating parents' choices on what they're feeding their children. Some would argue that we should, maybe for the same kind of line of thought that you're projecting. I would say no. I would say that we need to embrace freedom, and we can try through persuasion, through information, through argument versus coercion around choice. Now, I'll also step back and say there's been some great research out of the National Microschooling Center and VELA, the VELA Education Fund, around what entrepreneurs themselves are valuing in especially these emerging unconventional spaces. And most of these founders, this is true in my anecdotal experience, and the National Microschooling Center finds this statistically to be true, that, 3/4 of the founders who are leading these new unconventional spaces are former public school teachers who really wanted to do something different and better. And they're focused on quality. They, the vast majority of teachers and parents are interested in sort of traditional metrics of academic progress. And that is, again, what survey data at VELA and at National Microschooling Center show, that their top priority is the academic progress of their learners. So I think that it's certainly more the rule than the exception that that academic progress in sort of conventional ways of measuring that are a priority for these spaces. And in fact, many of them, the founders that I talk to, say that they have students come to their programs several years behind grade level, and they're able to quickly get these students up to grade level or beyond because of a highly individualized, personalized curriculum and learning experience. So, if anything, we should be looking to these unconventional models for really what academic progress looks like, what it can look like, and lean into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
In your work, what are some of the strongest inhibitors or roadblocks that people seem to face? And I'm not going to answer the question for you, but I'm curious if their perception of and this notion of not wanting to change is a strong one, or if it's, sort of more logistical challenges or bureaucratic challenges. Is it self-imposed challenges, I guess, or is it imposed by other people that seem to be hindering growth in some of these areas?
Yeah, I would say again that the education entrepreneurs that I speak to will say that their biggest challenges are bureaucratic. So there's sort of regulatory barriers to entry and scale that a lot of these founders encounter. In large part because the regulatory apparatus is intended for very large traditional schools, public or private. And so I think that, in fact, I think a lot of the experiences that today's microschool and similar model founders encounter is similar to what charter schools discovered,
Okay.
Sort of how do you find locations, what is proper zoning and so forth. So it's those kinds of challenges around zoning and occupancy codes that are outdated and not really meant for today's emerging school space. I think there's other challenges as well. I think about Nevada and Tennessee. I know where you are, Shaka, I would say, are two of the more difficult states to open and operate a secular private school. Nevada, in particular, has occupational licensing barriers that prevent anyone who does not have a state teacher or administrator license from opening and operating a secular private school. If you're a church-based school, you're exempt from that. That doesn't exist in most other states, as it should not. And so I think there's those kinds of regulatory barriers as well.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit. I'm sure you're familiar with DeSoto's book. This, I don't know, it's probably 20 years old now. The Mystery of Capital. In this book, he talks about what it takes to open businesses in different countries, right? And he tracks this, and it's just eye-opening, right? In some countries, it took, say, 90 days to open a business. In some, it took 400 days. And by the way, lots of greasing the skids with under-the-table payments to various regulators to say, hey, can we get this occupancy license, et cetera? And oftentimes, it seems like those types of barriers, inhibit people. And you're going to have some entrepreneurs who push and push and push and push through. And you're going to have some who I think make a, frankly, reasonable decision to go, boy, I'm tired of banging my head against a wall. I'm trying to do something good. And I'm bumping into these regulatory burdens.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to the ingenuity of today's education entrepreneurs. I mean, thinking about, again, Nevada as an example, very difficult to open a secular private school there, but their homeschooling laws are relatively flexible. And so what a lot of the founders in Nevada are doing is opening micro schools that are serving homeschoolers because that's what families want, and that is, where the demand is. And so these innovators are being creative and
they're finding
being
those
slightly
gaps.
permissionless. Yeah.
I was going to say a whole new world of creativity and innovation when you have all of these different innovators working together to create, just a surplus of ways to create fit. Fit is something we've had throughout this conversation, or throughout, this conference, which not surprisingly, we're at the Emerging School Models. I can never remember where to put this. Emerging School Models Conference. Of course, fit has come up in most of our conversations, this idea of creating learning environments that fit the needs of the students, the needs of the communities, the needs of the parents, as opposed to the students,
Right.
molding themselves or, adjusting themselves to fit the needs of the schools.
Yeah. I have one more question, Kerry, and that is, in thinking about all these new models, all these education entrepreneurs, and particularly in an area like Boston, I've got to imagine you're going to see lots of them popping up, right? I mean, in a densely populated area, there's going to be so many innovative things happening. You're going to see so many of these. How do you have a vision for how parents, say 5 years from now, maybe you're seeing some of this already, I'm sure, but how parents learn about this stuff, and particularly for, those of us of a certain age, like school looked basically one way, right? I hear this all the time where people say, "Oh, the school system is so different." And of course, I want to say, "Aren't you glad for that now?" But, and I think they are, but what they really often what they mean is the school system is different. You used to not have the ability to even make the choice, and therefore you didn't think about it much. You just went wherever the bus took you. Well, the landscape is totally different now, but with that comes now the onus is on parents to sort of ramp up and learn and evaluate lots of different components to see whether or not there is good fit. So for them, right? So and not just for them, for their children. I mean, you've got multiple children. I've got multiple children. And it's like they may have different needs. They undoubtedly have different needs.
Yeah.
How are we going to tell parents in a way that's sort of, I want to say streamlined, but that's digestible and that isn't overwhelming? Do you have a vision for how does that?
Yeah, I think I've
Where's
sort of
that going?
two responses to that. The first would be, how do we get help with consumer decisions in other parts of our lives? So if we're buying a new car, do we go to maybe Consumer Reports? Do we look at the Kelley Blue Book for values of different cars, right? Like we're reading automotive periodicals. We're talking to friends and family members. We're test driving and asking people what they think of their programs. That's the same thing that is happening, thankfully, with this emerging school space. And it's all sort of market-based and voluntary, at least now, and I would argue that it should stay that way. To be more practical in terms of how are families finding these places, there's a lot of entrepreneurs working on that question, some more sort of a centralized approach. But I see, again, more of these decentralized grassroots models, hyper-local resources to be the most effective, mainly because this space is so dynamic. It's so ever-changing that I just don't think with the technology we have now, if you had, sort of a top-down or national directory, I just don't think that they could keep up
Right.
in any
Right.
real way. Maybe that'll change. AI will, I'm sure, help with that. But as it stands now, the best sources of information that I'm seeing about emerging schools and spaces is happening locally in the grassroots level. I think about websites like microschoolflorida.com, which is for parents to figure out what's available for them in Florida for all different kinds of education choices. I think about the Wichita Innovative Schools and Educators Group in Wichita, Kansas, wisetogether.org, which enables families in that area to figure out what's available for them and has descriptions of different programs. I think about optionsforeducation.com in Southern Oregon, in the sort of Grants Pass area, rural Southern Oregon, that has a booming innovative education sector at the moment. And there's, again, a grassroots directory there for parents.
Yeah, much more local. And that jives with, I think, my impulses as well to sort of see it more localized. I've spoken with a lot of folks in the tech sector who I think have a lot, not a majority, but a lot of folks who I think have this idea for sort of, and they're trying to build to scale and they're trying to make it profitable, but they have this idea of like one database to rule them all, right? A sort of U.S. News and World Report style thing. And I agree with you. It seems to me that by its very nature, education is so local that what we don't want is like a national database where the tail wags the dog a little bit and then everybody starts to play to them. I mean, you've seen that in higher ed, right? Where then all of a sudden colleges are tinkering with their models so that they can move up in the rankings, and they get away from maybe their mission. And they're not as responsive to parents, which is ultimately what we want.
Right. I mean, I will say I completely agree with you, Shaka, there, but I will also say there's also competition even in those college rankings, right? Like you now see, I think it
that's
was
right.
Washington Monthly and the Wall Street Journal coming out providing different analysis to
Right.
U.S. News's
Right.
rankings and looking at, particularly with the Wall Street Journal, return on investment.
Right.
And so that, I think, is what will happen too if we were to get to more of a centralized system.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so great, Kerry. We're so grateful for you taking the time to share your wisdom and your vast experiences with us and sort of connecting the dots between what this world and what this free market world looks like and how it's influencing and applicable in the education landscape. So, very grateful. Thank you.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Gary. All right, Caitlin. So we just heard from Kerry McDonald at the Foundation for Economic Education. I think there's a lot to unpack there. What stood out to you?
Yeah, I think it's hard to address her conversation without acknowledging her enthusiasm for everything that's happening. Where right now are you hearing someone who leads a conversation with, I've never been more excited about education than I am right now?
Frankly, in public policy, in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
public policy space, like nobody said that. Everybody's just depressed and
Yeah.
sour,
Discouraged.
all the time. Yeah.
Totally. And then you look at what she's doing and you hear a little bit more about the education entrepreneurship lab that she leads. And it's not surprising that she feels so encouraged by what's going on. She spends every day on her podcast, the Liberated podcast, talking with education entrepreneurs who are identifying issues and then creating solutions that best fit the needs of the people they're trying to serve, whether it's their own students, whether it's their own kids, whether it's their community. So I imagine when you're spending all day long and your work weeks hearing about and helping guide and inform and speak into these different models, of course you're going to be encouraged. You're going to be inspired. You're going to be hopeful because they're tackling challenges that they're identifying challenges and then they're tackling them.
Yeah.
It's that doer mentality, that doer attitude.
Yep.
In one of the conversations we spoke about yesterday, someone said, there's a doer and you know you can identify the doer in every group.
Yeah. Katie Everett. Yeah. Said that. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. There you go. I mean, if she doesn't strike you as someone who is not only doing herself, but is encouraging and motivating others to just do in their own worlds and in their own respective professions, then.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that struck me and here's, I do want to talk about and get to what Kerry had to say about how she thinks we identify quality, how maybe the market identifies quality, right? Because that's pretty interesting. She comes from an economics background, and so she thinks about it through that lens, also the lens of truly parent choice. But before that, just to kind of piggyback what you were saying about the doers, right? The education entrepreneurs in this space. To me, the link to quality is that it's entirely too much work and too hard to start a new school, a new idea to breathe life into some new model when you're up against often a system of regulations and laws that has been in place for decades, that is thinking about a zoned public school, right? That's a lot of work to deliver a product that either no one wants or that is of shoddy quality.
Right.
Right. I think it speaks to an extent to like, hey, why would you stick around? There's easier ways to sort of make a buck if that's what you're interested in, right? So I do think that it strikes me that the education entrepreneurs that Kerry's running into and that she's kind of highlighting, they're super interested in quality.
Right.
Otherwise, why do this? It's too much work. You can do something else that's much easier than start a new school and go through all those, clear all those hurdles. Yeah, if you didn't care.
Totally. Speaking of quality, I want to hear more about what your thoughts were or what your thoughts are on how she articulated measuring for quality, because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of, it made me have a lot of different thoughts. I'm curious what yours were.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I loved her answer where she was talking about kind of a grocery store. She also gave another great analogy And who knows, shout out to Dunkin' Donuts coffee, but she gave a great analogy about how that's the coffee she prefers.
Right.
Her husband prefers kind of a more like she upscale,
Right.
coffee place. And guess what? They both thrive, and I gather that,
They both get their
they
caffeine.
both get their caffeine fix in the morning. Okay.
Yeah.
So one way she talked about gauging, quality is just to see like what's the demand.
Mm-hmm.
And if people keep showing up, then it at least indicates something, right?
They keep choosing.
Yeah. Now, I think what struck me is that I believe that's true, certainly, but it works in a situation where there is real choice, where where things are a little bit different. I think in an educational context is that we just haven't had a landscape of true choice, true
Okay.
parent choice, right? Parents can't walk away. Her husband can walk away from Dunkin' Donuts and go, I don't want to do this anymore.
Right. Right.
We've got compulsory education laws.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a family who can't homeschool because maybe you don't have the capacity, maybe your life just does not work for that, for
Yeah.
a myriad of reasons.
Sure.
If you're a family, so homeschooling doesn't work, but the zoned conventional school doesn't work. If you don't have charters, private choice, etc., you can't afford private school, there's no choice programs,
Yeah.
you're kind of stuck, right? There aren't choices, so you're still going to go back to maybe a school that does not work for
That
your
doesn't
child,
serve you or meet your needs.
right? And I would say that's
very true.
that's an indicator of your lack of options and lack of choice, rather than it's not showing true demand.
Sure.
I think Carrie would agree with that.
Yeah. Right. I see what you're saying.
But anyway, that's kind of where my mind went a little bit, is like, all right, it works. So I guess maybe the answer, what I'm saying is, how do we get to a place where there is true choice?
Yeah.
So that parents can say, and I felt this when I was a school administrator, in some ways there was no more accountability than when a parent sat across the room from me and said, Mr. Mitchell, this isn't working for us.
Yeah. Right.
We're not coming back. That's real
There you go.
accountability. Like, I didn't need the test score. I didn't need the checklist
Yeah.
or whatever.
That was the direct feedback
That was
shared with
direct
you everything
feedback.
you needed to
Yeah,
know.
and
Your
I
school
think
wasn't
Carrie would
working for
agree
that.
with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's real feedback.
The other thought that conversation sort of made me had this idea of choosing. I loved, I'm all for this idea. If something's not working and people are not choosing it,
Yeah.
she was pretty direct. It should go away.
Yeah.
And she said that's actually an indicator of a really healthy market
Yep.
or society. If
Yep.
something is not working and people are not choosing it, it should leave.
Right.
I'd be curious for people that are listening to this and, your thoughts as well. All of these schools right now, public schools, lots of different types of schools, honestly, aren't working. They're
Yeah.
not meeting the needs of the students in their community.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of making the decision to close them and do something else, they're looking for more money.
Right.
They're asking for more money.
Right.
They're
The
applying for more
incentives are,
money.
like,
And in
upside
some
down.
cases,
Yeah.
they're not even asking or looking. They're just getting
Yeah.
more money.
Yeah. Yeah.
I understand how dynamic and complicated it is to close a school because you have all these students that
Yep.
rely on it for every reason under the sun.
Right.
So what's a potential alternative
Yeah.
to having schools that are failing?
Yeah.
And instead of closing, if that's not an option, or if it is an option, what does it need to look like? And then why are we just pouring money, more dollars?
That's a totally fair question. We pour so much money into systems that we know aren't working. Right? I mean, you look at the per pupil expenditure in certain cities, and it's like jaw dropping. Right?
Right.
Cities like Baltimore. I mean,
Yeah.
spend a lot of money per pupil, and
Yeah, Philadelphia.
Philadelphia, and parents find this out and they go, wait a minute, we spend how much,
Yeah,
and for what, ROI?
totally.
So it's a totally valid question. I suspect that Carrie would say, yeah, we've got to rethink the whole system, right? And I have to say, I really respect the fact that Carrie is living out her values. I mean, she
Could
talked
not agree
about
more.
this with her own family and her
Right.
children. Right? She wrote a book, Unschooled, and we can drop links to it in the show notes and whatnot.
Yep.
But that is a path she's chosen, right? I think too often on the other side of this, you see, I would say, like, rank hypocrisy
Yeah.
with people who advocate only for one size fits all schools and one size fits all measures of quality.
Right.
Meanwhile, they send their own children to out of district or
Yep.
Tony private schools in other
Yeah, they
neighborhoods, what
don't
have you.
practice what they
They
preach.
don't practice what they preach. I think Carrie really lives out, what she writes about, what she studies,
Yeah.
and I have a lot of respect for that.
I have a lot of respect for that, and I almost feel as if it just is another, not that she needs any more credibility, but it really does sort of elevate, from my perspective, someone's credibility when they are speaking from experiences that they've had with their children.
Mm-hmm.
To
Yeah.
be able to put your money where your mouth is
Yeah.
and then, lean in hard to it.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
can I ask you a question?
yeah.
What did you think about when Carrie was talking about, basically parents helping other parents? We said, how do parents find out about
Mm,
these things? And we've spoken with somebody else who said a similar thing. I think it was when we talked to Mike
Mike
McShane.
McShane. Yeah, that's exactly what I was
He was
thinking
in
of.
Ireland, and he said, "Hey, I'm not Irish. I don't know anything about the
Yeah.
Irish school system. So what do? You ask people you know, and you kind of put their opinion through your filter."
Yep.
Um, and Carrie's talking about a similar thing, like, and she likened it to, well, what do you do when you
By a
buy a
car.
car,
Hmm.
right? What do you do for r- restaurant recommendations?
That's right.
Whatever. You go to Yelp, and you see what are the super Yelpers saying.
Yeah.
Okay, do you think that's the same? I mean, what's similar? What's different about education?
Okay.
Because to be fair, I really like that sort of analogy, but a year's worth of fourth grade
Hmm.
is a little bit different from, is the pepperoni pizza, any good?
Right. Then your Yelp review.
Yeah.
So I think that's so interesting because just a couple initial thoughts. I think on one hand, you almost provided an answer to that question with what you just said before, which was there was no greater feedback or no greater indicator of whether or not
Oh
you're
yeah,
doing your job than when the parent sat across from you and
that's true.
said, I am coming back or I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
So, if from your perspective as a school administrator, that direct feedback and choice from a parent
Hmm.
is going to mean the most to you, then would
Hmm.
that not be the strongest,
Indicator.
metric or indicator
That's
for
pretty good.
whether to ask other parents, what has your experience been? I think the
That's a
most
great measurement,
interesting,
actually. Yeah.
I think the most interesting part of what that process would look like in reality would actually be what Mike McShane said, which was you have to put their experience through your own filter. And
Right.
he gave the analogy, if I were in Boston, my rating for this restaurant would look one way, but if it was someone coming from, rural Kansas who had never been, their experience would look different based on their own
Yeah.
personality
Yeah.
and what they are accustomed to. And so the what I would think would be the most interesting part of that process, the process of exchanging
Hmm.
ideas and experiences and thoughts with another parent from these different schools, would be, are you able to internalize
Hmm.
their experience and their commentary on the experience their students or children had and make use of it in a way that's most effective for your child?
Hmm.
You're not taking, hey, your daughter had a great experience at this school. My daughter will have a great experience at this school.
Right.
It's not, they're different. They're different children. So are you able to infer based off of what someone's sharing with you about their experience
Yeah.
in a way that's going to be meaningful and impactful
Yeah.
and effective in your own assessment of whether or not that school is going to be a good
Right.
fit?
And whether or not it's going to be a good fit. Yeah. I think it strikes me that there's still going to be a role for organizations, probably organizations or think about it as I've heard it described as maybe sometimes it's like concierge
Mm. Okay.
services, somebody who helps you, right? You go to s- really nice hotels and they have a concierge. They say, "Oh, you need help navigating the city. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
right? Let me tell you give you my best judgment about where to
Right.
go, where to avoid, whatever,
Right.
whatever. Here's some shows you can see, or what
Someone
have you."
who's knowledgeable on the space to share with you what you don't even know you don't know.
That's exactly right, because it's what you don't know. And if you've had children who have gone through a conventional, school experience,
Right.
and if that was your experience, you just may not, you don't know what this new wide world of educational
Yeah.
entrepreneurship looks
Looks
like. So you
like.
don't even know what to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
think that's exactly right.
right? I mean, and I say this, I was working in the education space, and when it came time to put our girls in school, my eldest, um, I didn't know anything about Montessori.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up finding a Montessori school, and it was a great experience, but I had to learn. I was already in the space,
Yeah.
right? So now imagine someone who's never had that kind of exposure. So I do think there's still going to be a role for some external
For sure.
parent sort of education. I don't mean that in a patronizing way. I hope it doesn't sound that way, but
Yeah.
just to support, right? Like you
Yeah.
don't know, like you said, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah.
And I think, in a couple of these conversations, of course, we're at the Emerging School Models Symposium. Everybody is doing something emerging. They're doing something
Right.
different. Their
Right.
models are not traditional. And that is the best part. So a lot of our conversations with the people that have been attending are of the mindset that new, different, evolving, emerging is the way to go.
Yeah.
And it's this idea of, how different can you be to meet the needs, to best meet the needs of the student they're trying to serve.
Right.
All of that to say, and we've asked some of our guests this question, and I don't know that I'm fully satiated on the answers. Measuring success or assessing quality when it comes to these, there has got to be a common language that we're all going to speak
Mm.
about these models. And we've heard different things. So, parents continuing to choose, that's a
Mm-hmm.
measurement for success. I would
Mm-hmm.
agree with that. Um, you know, I can't remember who said it yesterday. Post-secondary outcomes is the
Right. Right.
driving metric that people should be using,
Right.
because ultimately that's the goal.
Right.
Are they able to
Is my
pursue
child
higher
going to be thriving as an
That's right,
adult?
right.
Yeah.
Are they
Human
contributing to
flourishing. We heard about
society?
that. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with that. So are those the two ones that every,
Right.
model is going to begin
Right.
using? Well,
Right.
do parents continue to choose you, and how is your students, post-secondary? What other metrics are out there? We've had conversations with people in the past who've said, you know, honesty, hard work,
Yeah. Yeah.
being able to become independent thinkers. Like there's so many ways to measure success and to measure quality, and there's
Right.
so many factors,
Right.
and quality is subjective. So I guess, instead of spending the next week discussing what quality looks like, do you think that there's an opportunity, or are we looking at a world where at any point we're going to be able to speak one language when it comes to how we assess quality in these different models? And do we need that?
Man, that is such a good question, and I can't believe you sprung it on me right at the end of this breakdown. So I'm gonna
We'll
need
have to
more
pick
time.
it up.
Yeah, we're gonna have to pick that one up, but maybe we put it to our listeners
Oh, I
and
think that's a
viewers a
great way to
little
start
bit.
it.
And I might say, all right, if you're listening to this or watching it, do you see the ability for us to have a common language
Hmm.
around measures of quality?
Yeah, a
Doesn't mean
unified metric system of assessing quality.
maybe, yeah, doesn't mean we have to agree even to where the bar is placed,
Yeah, no, I
right? Even
agree,
just
for sure.
is the language, right? We
Yeah.
don't have to use the same words.
Yes.
Or I don't know.
The same, the same bar. We're not all going necessarily
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
same height.
yeah. But is there a common language? And I want to say I think it's possible, and I also reserve the right to change my
Take that
mind
back.
100 times in the next week. So let's see what
Awesome.
people tell us. That's a great question, thought provoking as always. So thanks, Caitlin.
Awesome. Thanks, Shaka.
All right.